Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville. I'm Al Hunt, and we both are in the Metro Washington area now. That's the first time in months, James.
I'm telling you, reunited on the Banks Hallmark. I'm on the West Bank and you're on the East Bank.
And we're both going to speak on our microphone so everybody can hear us. And we're joined this week by Pulitzer Prize-winning author and journalist and the foremost expert, I think, on the pandemic, Laurie Garrett, and the foremost expert, I'm not exaggerating, folks, I promise, on the National Football League and the Super Bowl, Greg Cosell, the senior producer at NFL Films. Now remember, we take your questions each episode, so write into politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. We'll get to as many as we can, and don't forget to tell us where you're from. This episode is sponsored by GAINFUL, IPVANISH, and BLINKIST. I love BLINKIST, and I don't know why I draw a blank sometimes when I try to pronounce a name. It's BLINKIST. It's me, not them. Please check out the links to our sponsors in the show notes, and we thank you for supporting our sponsors. It really helps make this podcast happen. And please tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. James, lot to talk about this week, but I think three things we want to focus on before our great guest, and that's the COVID relief package, the Republican Civil War, and next week's impeachment trial. Let me just take a stab at the COVID relief package. You know, if Republicans were serious about trying to find common ground on a COVID stimulus good, and they make one good point, and that is the stimulus checks should be targeted, and they shouldn't just go to families making as much as $250,000. But the proposal they put forth doesn't begin to meet the needs of tens of millions out of work, hungry, and evicted from housing. There's nothing sacrosanct about Biden's $1.9 trillion. I'm a little bit less interested in the bottom line figure than what the particulars are. You can shave some stuff off. And if you go to a Democratic-only reconciliation, Joe Manchin and a few of the more moderate conservative types will make them shave a few off. But I think right now it would be better to get a deal, but the Republicans are just posturing. And to say we tried and Biden stiffed us, that's not true. We need to get that money and those resources out as quickly as possible to try to get back to some semi-normal state. Delay hurts us. What do you think?
The best idea that I've seen, first of all, is that 1.9 billion, 600 billion or whatever the back and forth is. It's all we can do is report the figure. And the best idea I heard was written in Jonathan Chait by Jason Furman, that what you do is you do 1.2 trillion through September of this year.
The Furman idea,
Yeah, the Furman idea. Then at September, if the economy's back, as a lot of people think it will be, then that's the end of it. But in that, you build stabilizers. So if people are still in a world of hurt, these variants come through. We'll talk to Laurie Garrett about this later today. You don't have to go through the same rigmarole again. And that way you can say, well, it's 1.2 billion. So that's a pretty good, because it's just the way the lunacy of the way we cover things was 1.9, 1.2, 600 billion. It seems like it's a kind of a compromise thing, of course, which the commentariat loves the idea of just they got a figure, you got a figure, let's just agree on the middle figure. Well, this is a way to get to kind of a middle figure, but at the same time, if things don't work out the way we hope they do, you automatically rolling over more checks for more people. And I agree, and I do think that most left of center economists agree with you that you want to get these benefits to people who are unemployed much more than people that are already employed and that really need it. And to the extent that they can do that fairly and with a highly degree of, targeting people, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, well, I just glanced at the Furman proposal, but I totally agree with you. It makes such sense, probably why it won't happen, but it really does. It's a protection. I mean, there are forecasts that this economy is going to take off as soon as we get back to something approaching normal. And if we do that by the end of the third quarter, then we won't need more relief. But if we don't, it takes longer to get back there and there's still people struggling, then, there can be these automatic payments that take place. So it's a great idea. I wish it would happen.
Well, as they say in the Marine Corps, wish in one hand and shit in the other, see which one fills up the fastest. But okay, I wish too.
Let's talk about the Republican Civil War. Marjorie Greene, Liz Cheney. I mean, you can't believe it. You really can't. It's really a case of Republicans are going to embrace Jewish space lasers that set fires in California and go after God-fearing Christians, or are they going to keep with their very conservative, for you and me, much too conservative ideology that Liz Cheney represents?
But what about AOC and Maxine Waters?
Yeah,
but that's the answer to everything. And now it's Ilhan Omar. It's of course mark it up with any female of color, and that's where they're going full time. Well, you want to say, we got Martin Taylor Greene. You're right. You got AOC. Oh, shut up. AOC is a smart, kind of media savvy person that believes that we can achieve universal coverage for health care and want to, minimum income. But probably, I would say these are not difficult, not particularly popular politically, but that's a perfectly acceptable position for a politician to have. I wouldn't care if my daughter came home and said, Dad, she has. I just love AOC. It's great, something wrong with that. When your daughter comes home and says, Dad, I love Marjorie Taylor Greene, you got a problem, dude. You got a real whack job for a daughter. This is not the same thing. And I see that Axios, of all places, that they do great work. I love Mike Allen. I love Jonathan Twain. Fall into this both-siderism crap that has just become the hallmark of Washington over the last 30 years. AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene are not even on the same planet. All right?
One's dangerous and one may be unrealistic, but...
right. There's a difference between being aspirational and being a kook.
Right. Worse than a kook.
Worse than a kook,
James, I agree with you totally on this. But here's what gets me, and maybe it's changing now, but so far the Republican fringe is far more lethal, far more dangerous, far more insidious, and far bigger than what might be termed the Democratic fringe, if that's what you want to call it. Yet the Democrats have paid a price for theirs, the defund the police and everything. The Republicans seem not to so far have paid a price for the Marjorie Greenes of the world and others who were there before her.
Well, so far is the key phrase here. And remember when Lester Maddox was the governor of Georgia, he famously said the problem with Georgia prisons is the quality of the inmate. The problem with the Republican Party is the quality of the Republican primary voters. All right? These are people, again, there's a huge piece about what percent of Republicans actually embrace QAnon. They're too big to fail. And so as long as you have wacky voters, that's going to produce wacky politicians. We keep saying, well, when is Lindsey Graham going to stand up to this? The truth of the matter is Lindsey Graham is doing what a majority of the Republicans in South Carolina want him to do. That the problem here is of course we have sycophant, hypocritical, God knows what not Republican politicians. But by and large, if you got them in a corner, they'd say, "Look, this is what my voters want." We got some low quality people in this country. Well, some really low quality people. And no one wants to say some people in this country are just goddamn dumb.
Yeah, why don't they pay a price? It should be that those people don't represent a majority in most general elections. Maybe they do in North Georgia, I don't know, but not in most places. And again, the Democrats paid a price for their, I think, far more benign, if counterproductive, cause for things like defunding the police. And Republicans so far, I don't know if that's the Democrats' fault, I don't know what it is, but they have not paid a price.
Well, you know what? In January 2017, when Trump took office, they had the presidency, they had the Senate, they had the House. Now they have neither of the three. So you just can't say they didn't pay a price. Certainly the price may not be consummate what we think the offense is. And every time they turn around today, they have an impeachment trial that they don't want to fool with. Every Republican's got a microphone in her or his face asking about Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't buy that they hadn't paid a price. I will buy this. They hadn't paid a price consummate with the damage they did. But when you hold the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and 4 years later you got none of the three, you've paid some price.
Well, James, that's true of all incumbents. That was true of Clinton. That was true of Obama. I mean, they all leave with fewer members of Congress than they came in with.
But don't know that at the end of the first term that they were both reelected. Trump was not reelected.
I know they were,
he
but
paid
again,
a price.
if you look at the Senate and the House in 1993 and in 2001, there were fewer Democrats. The same with 2009 and 17. I know, and I agree with you, they haven't paid a price anywhere near commensurate with what they should pay. I hope it's starting to change. Maybe it has to do with the Democrats making a better case.
Well, you know what? In 4 years, if you had the presidency, you had the House, you had the Senate, and 4 years later you have neither of the three, there's some price that's been paid. But how much?
Like most incumbents do. But let's turn to impeachment. The Republican cop-out, it's not constitutional. Now, that really is a cop-out. It is not. The preponderance of constitutional scholars, as our friend Walter Dellinger has pointed out, citing the very conservative Judge Michael McConnell, say, it is constitutional. It says that, the Senate shall try all who have been impeached. It doesn't say all who have stayed in office. But it is a cop-out that they're getting away with, I'm afraid. And again, I don't know if they'll pay a price for it, but I think that's everyone, when you hear them interviewed, that's what they say. Not that I think he didn't do anything, not that he's not even impeachable, but, he's left office, and so it really isn't constitutional.
We don't know if it's constitutional or not. It's not anything until the Supreme Court says it is. So, I mean, but I'd say to the proposal, if you think he's guilty as it is, then do that and let the courts decide. But because the law professor says it's constitutional or not constitutional, and another one says it is and isn't, we have no idea if it's constitutional or not. If I read the articles, I try to be fair. It does seem to me that people like Dean Dellinger have a much better point, but there are people that say otherwise, and the only way that you're going to find out is go ahead and do it and then let the courts decide it if Trump tries to run again.
Yeah. There's not many that say otherwise. There are some.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what an opinion of the Attorney General or the Solicitor General or the Dean of the Yale Law School says. It doesn't make a shit. The only thing that matters is when the court says it's constitutional. And we don't know that.
The only way to test that is then
right, is to do it and go through it and let's find out.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
We talked the other day, and you said, I don't know if you still believe this, that your over-under on the number of votes to convict would be 58.5. If you're sticking with that, I'll take the under.
Okay, I'll stick with it. I'll go with the over. I'm going to come in with 55. And I think that the presentation, from everything that I've heard and everything I've read, I've heard a little, not much insider stuff, but some, but I've read a lot. And I think Jamie Raskin is going to emerge as one of the real true heroes of the Democratic Party when this is over. Or maybe not just the Democratic Party, but maybe in the whole United States Congress. But I think that the presentation and the facts and all of the things that they marshal is going to make a lot of people very uncomfortable. And I need 4 more than the 55 that I go in there with, and I'll go ahead. I'll take the over 58.5.
Okay. I hope you win this bet, and I think this is even a more compelling case than a year ago. But I thought Adam Schiff and Val Demings, made a very Jason Crow made a very effective case then, and they just didn't pay any attention to it. Came in with their minds made up and just tuned out.
They live in a different world now. They got really vulnerable Senate seats coming up. And by the way, watch the 2026 class of Republicans. Watch the ones that just were reelected. And it's going to be interesting to see where they go. Because if Mitch McConnell likes to play the long game, whatever that means, but he uses the phrase, the long game is not on Trump's side here. And the information that is going to come forward at this trial, and it's just going to keep coming forward because history is just going to keep going over this, and they're going to find more and more and more and more. And I think the Democrats are exactly right. The strategy has to be bring heat, bring heat, bring heat. Attack, attack, attack. Impeach, convict, investigate, everything. Expose this for what it is. An era of unprecedented criminality, of unprecedented attack on everything that people care about in this country. Don't try to parse it. Don't try to be clever. Don't try to be anything. Bring heat. Attack constantly. Never let up. Be like General Grant. Just keep putting the pressure on. Pressure, pressure, pressure. It will work in the end.
What, James, I tell you what, I hope you win this little wager. But if Lindsey Graham switches, who was just elected, I'll buy you 2 dinners, not just 1, 2, at any place you choose, anywhere.
I don't know, man.
I don't know. I think little Lindsey's going to remain a coward for a long time.
I'm sure. I'm not counting on Lindsey Graham to be anything other than Lindsey Graham or anybody else. I just think that there might be 4 additional votes. No one has come out and announced it. Sometimes you just, I'm a gambler. Sometimes you got to bet on the come. You say, what is going to happen here? And I just think that when as they go through the whole Liz Cheney, Marjorie Taylor Greene, some of these Republicans say, man, we're going to lose an end to this fight. We're just getting hammered here. And, we got to get out of this hammerlock that we're in and move on. But we'll say I'm not, if I've been wrong about it, I'm not the end of days.
I've never
clearly the safer bet. Well, I don't want to lose it. I want to win it. But I think Kansas City is going to cover. I want to win.
Well, we will get to that in just a few minutes. But, on that, we might agree. But this has been one hell of a week. And you know what? Next week will be even bigger. Hey, James, whether you're trying to build muscle, lose weight, or just get your nutrition on track, particularly in these times, protein is critical. But it's especially important to get the protein powder that's right for your lifestyle and health goals. That's why it's exciting to discover GAINFUL. It's personalized to your exact nutritional needs to work for you. GAINFUL offers customized protein based on your body type, diet, fitness, habits, and goals. Good for everybody, but particularly for geezers like us.
Yeah, I started running literally daily on August the 1st, 1981. And so I'll be 40 years this August the 1st. And, of course, I've over the last 40 years, let's say I've aged a little bit. And I'll be honest with our listeners, I haven't tried this yet, but boy, does it sound like there's something tailor-made for me. And I'm going to do my profile, and I'm a big flavor guy, so I want to pick the flavors that work. And this sounds like something terrific. And I think a lot of people that listen to us do understand the value of exercise, and something like this can be a real, something really neat in our toolbox. So I'm looking forward to trying this, and I think it can have real benefit to a guy like me.
Yeah, me too, James. I jogged every day for more than 40 years. My wife made fun of me one time when there was this huge snowstorm in Washington. I was the only person on Wisconsin Avenue. But I now do inside. I do the Peloton and other things. And I'm going to do the same thing because this is designed by a team of sports nutrition experts who work with professional teams and athletes. So their formulas are optimized for performance with simple and effective ingredients. And there's no fillers, gluten, soy, or anything artificial. And you can even take real advantage of free, unlimited one-on-one access to your own registered dietitian. No other protein comes with this kind of hands-on attention, and it's an incredible bonus. It gives you the tools to make the most of the product, right?
Correct. And if you read, I think it was actually I think maybe it was the Times, give them credit for this, about how much nutrition goes into like Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes. How if these kind of elite athletes are paying this much attention to nutrition, maybe the other definition of an elite athlete is Al Hunt and James Carville, but maybe we ought to pay more attention to it. I think this is a product that is really worthy of investigation.
Yeah. Tom Brady's not going strong at 43 because he's on a fast food diet. But here's my favorite part. My favorite part. GAINFUL protein is never repetitive or boring with GAINFUL. You're never going to be stuck with a big tub of protein with a flavor you're not into. GAINFUL sends you a pouch of unflavored protein accompanied by a single serving flavor boost. And it seems great that you can switch up the flavors. And I have to tell you, when I started, James, I'm going to peanut butter right away. You also can choose from rich chocolate cookies and cream, vanilla, chocolate, peanut butter, strawberry cream, and kaffa mocha to customize each and every protein shake to your exact taste with personalized formula. Or you can just add the unflavored protein straight. Try your smoothies and recipes.
Right.
With a GAINFUL subscription, you'll receive monthly shipments straight to your door with the ability to easily pause, change the frequency of deliveries, or update your formula and flavors.
Sounds good to me. And if you can get the neutral flavor and do like you do with a, Diet Coke, squeeze half a lemon into it, a lime, whatever you like, an orange. You can do your own, flavor supplement if you want to.
Right now, we have a special offer for our listeners to get $15 off your first month of personalized protein powder when you go to gainful.com/warroom. That's gainful.com/warroom. And that's all one word. Trust me, you're going to love having personalized protein powder from GAINFUL. It's a game changer. So that's gainful.com/warroom to get $15 off your first month, or go to the link on our show notes. Hey, James, we're going to talk to the Tony Fauci of journalism. No one forecasts and understands this deadly virus better than Laurie Garrett, a prize-winning author and journalist who more than a quarter a century ago wrote The Coming Plague. Laurie, we are so honored to have you on this program. Let me start by asking you, there's a feeling of more optimism now than there was several months ago. We have multiple vaccines. We have people in charge who are letting the scientists play the role they should play. But you're a realist, and for all that good news, you still think we have a long way to go, am I right, before we're safe and back to semi-normal?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I don't really think we go back to normal. We're going to go forward to some new reality. We'll come out of this viral episode, but we won't come out the same nation, the same international business climate, the same cultural climate as we were in 2019. So I generally object to the concept of going back to normal, though I realize it fuels a lot of great monetary exchanges on the Wall Street exchange. What I said back a year ago, last February, I said we were in for a 36-month battle. And I meant that in the context of 36 months until hospitals were not burdened, 36 months until business operations resumed in some new form, and such cultural things as theater events, movies, basketball games, and so on could go back to having the stands filled, the seats filled. And I still think that's a reasonable expectation. I realize that now that we have vaccines, and we amazingly have 5 reasonably good vaccines already in use in various places around the world, there's great reason for improved optimism. But as we're discovering here in the richest country in the world, rolling out a vaccine campaign is much more complicated than people had realized or thought. And on top of that, we're playing havoc with viral evolution, which is occurring right before our eyes, bringing forward all sorts of new strains of the virus that are escape mutations, trying to escape our vaccines and escape our immune responses. So this virus still has some curveballs to throw us.
Laurie, let me ask you about that new variant in a minute, but I want to go back to the point you made a minute ago about the aftermath. It's going to be ugly, maybe not terribly dissimilar from the aftermath of the 2009 financial crisis, with a lot of grievances. Will be more nationalistic, maybe more bitter as a people, unequal. That sort of is what happened after 2009, and something similar may happen this time.
You can already see that most of the Fortune 500 companies and the next tier down in multinational companies are making plans that involve being very, very different business communities than they had been before. They will never fly to as many meetings again. They will never spend as much money on travel and hotels again. They will never believe in just-in-time delivery as a safe way to go. We will now see inventories and stockpiles. The whole chain of production is going to be altered. Every single aspect of, you just take, how do you make a car and who makes what parts in what countries? All of this is going to begin to involve far more strategic planning related to the economic and political relationships between nations. We're going to see dramatic changes in how people think about culture and think about art and the experience of entertainment, music, all of that. I mean, already you're seeing artists the world over, whether they're dancers, performers, singers, writers, whatever they may be. The whole creative process is going through a complete rethink as people try to create in lockdown. And I think some of the lessons learned from it will be positive, and people will come out the other side doing things differently than they did before COVID.
You mentioned the new variant, and is it going to hit the U.S. as hard as it's hit Europe? And from just only 2 weeks' experience, as you look at what the Biden administration is trying to do about that, and what they had, what they inherited, are they doing what you'd like to see, or they should be doing more?
Well, first of all, it's not a new variant. It's not two new variants. It's many, many new variants.
Right.
And the only reason we don't always speak in the multi-plural status is that we do such a poor job of looking for these variants in the United States that we really don't have a comprehensive sense of what's drifting around in patients and in communities around America. It's almost pure chance that we stumble upon, for example, the new variant in Southern California that appears to be more transmissible, similar to the UK variant. The new variant in Ohio, the emergence of the Brazilian variant and the South African variant in the United States in several states, and the UK variant as of today identified in 38 US states. You combine all this together and you begin to get a picture of where we're headed. The virus mutates or is able to spread in mutant form when there's a lot of viral activity and human interaction going on. So we are not doing enough to control how much human-to-human spread there is. We're not wearing our masks enough. We're not staying away from group settings enough. We're not taking all the obvious precautions that by now absolutely every single American knows the list, knows what they should be doing, but they're not doing it. And the result is that there's a lot of opportunity for the virus to spread around and go from person to person, and in the process go through some mutational events. On top of that, unfortunately, we're approaching treatment in this country in a very haphazard fashion because we don't really have any good, solid recipe for how to treat a severely ill COVID patient. And we have even less of a recipe if the COVID patient comes to us already plagued with a prior set of diseases, such as acute diabetes or major cardiac problems or cancer. So the result is that there's a kind of throw things at them, try the kitchen sink, this drug, that drug, this combination. Sure, they're in this stage of the disease and the medical literature says this drug only works in earlier stage, but what the heck, it's all we got, throw it at them. And the result is that we're kind of creating, hundreds thousand petri dishes walking around that provide terrific environmental pressure on the virus to mutate. They're not being treated well enough to kill off the virus. They're being treated well enough to put selection pressure on the virus. Jim, to put this in context, think of it as what we've been dealing with for a couple of decades now with antibiotics. As you know, all our antibiotics are getting less and less and less effective all the time because bacterial populations are undergoing a kind of evolutionary process. As we throw inappropriately used antibiotics at them, it selects for the ones that happen to have appropriate genetic factors to allow them to become the new drug-resistant strain. And we're kind of doing the same thing now with COVID.
James Carville, you want to jump in?
I do. So, you've been covering high-end biology for years and years and years, since the last century. And, of course, you knew that something like this, a real possibility this is going to happen. When did you have your oh shit moment? This is the big one. Do you remember at a point where, you had the SARS and you've had other, you wrote about it extensively, won a Pulitzer Prize on Ebola. But when was there a moment where you said, oh my God, this is what we've all feared?
Yes.
Was such a moment?
It was New Year's Eve, 2019.
Ugh.
I was monitoring reports out of China, and I had already been trying to keep track of this since before Christmas. And because I had been in China during the SARS epidemic in 2003 and had tracked Chinese response to the 1997 emergence of H5N1, the very, very, very dangerous, very lethal form of influenza. I'd been several times to China. I had a sense that I was already witnessing a cover-up. And so as I was seeing reports, particularly once I knew that doctors had put out information regarding the possibility of a strange new infectious form of pneumonia, and that they had been suppressed for putting that information out, I knew, we're dealing here with something that feels a lot to me like SARS in 2003. So,
this is kind of a local thing, but it's about a policy. In Mardi Gras of 2020, we had a huge, we were one of the first places hit, and I remember our governor was actually on the PBS NewsHour, hosted by Judy Woodruff, Al's wife, and he was asked, did anybody say anything? And he said, no, we had no indication. Nobody in public health, nobody from the CDC ever called the governor, ever called the mayor and said, hey, maybe this is not the best idea you ever had. Does public health in the United States, that whole infrastructure, should it be in for some second guessing and criticism here?
Well, certainly that's already going on.
Right.
But I think you have to step back and understand a little bit about how our public health system is organized. After I wrote The Coming Plague, the only real criticism I came in for, which surprised me, I was expecting an onslaught of attack about my book because I was basically arguing that American medicine had prematurely closed the book on infectious diseases and declared victory over the microbes. But the one criticism that resonated for me was, well, what are you going to do about it? So I spent a year traveling across the former Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact nations of Eastern Europe, and traveling across India and in the Ebola epidemic in what was then called Zaire, Democratic Republic of Congo, and a number of other locations all over the United States, trying to understand really what was the status of public health, and could public health conquer the next big one when it arrived? What were the weak spots? What were the strengths? And I was stunned to find out really how terrible it was in most of the world, including all of the United States, and largely because we had seen a power struggle in the early 20th century between organized medicine and public health. And organized medicine always has more money, always has more prestige. An MD gets you more public attention than a PhD. And the notion of the individual who saves your personal life when you have a heart attack versus the individual who saves the life of your whole community by making the water safe to drink. Well, most people put the equation on the side of that one life, theirs, when they have the heart attack. And I saw that it really didn't matter whether you were talking about a communist society, a capitalist society, an autocracy, or a democracy. Everywhere you went, this same power struggle had unfolded in the 20th century at the dawn of the germ theory era and ended up decidedly on the side of organized medicine and the power structure of doctors and hospitals. And so you have a situation where an individual who is in charge of saving, say here in New York City, 8.5 million lives every day by testing and ensuring the safety of our drinking water, that person is probably earning somewhere in the ballpark of $70,000 or $80,000 a year, whereas the chief of medicine of a local hospital who treats a handful of patients a week is making $250,000 a year. And then if you go outside of the salary differential and just ask, where are the resources, you can see what we're experiencing right now as we try to roll out vaccines across America. You have health departments that still have 35-year-old fax machines, and they have computers operating on Windows 98. They have individuals trying to get around in 20-year-old vehicles to get out into rural areas to see and check on patients and do contact tracing. We're operating on a shoestring and expecting these people to have surge capacity to go to full, all-out war standing with an army that's grossly underpaid, way too small, and using armaments that the enemy conquered years ago.
Alvin?
You mentioned your prescience on New Year's Eve 2019. We know, I think everyone agrees, China wasn't honest, transparent, and forthright. Two questions. If they had been, how much less severe might this have been globally? And in any case, if the Trump administration had handled this properly and acknowledged it and moved on it and relied on the experts and done things that should have been done, how much better could this country have done than the 450,000 deaths we already have?
Yeah. So last year, I wrote the cover story of the New Republic for their April 2020 issue. I had spent the whole month of March and a fair part of February working on it, and it was comparing and contrasting the Xi regime response in China to the Trump regime response in the United States to the virus, and trying to see where was the culpability, who was responsible, and how bad was this going to get. It was obvious to me that these two men, very imperfect individuals, very ego-structured leaders who require sycophants around them and require good news, positive news all the time, that neither of them were the right men to have as the two most powerful individuals on planet Earth at the moment that this virus emerged. In the case of Xi Jinping, it's very clear that he knew that it was a serious human-to-human, airborne, transmissible, very lethal microbe that was spread all over Wuhan and had already made it throughout Hebei province and into neighboring provinces. And that he knew that and told the state council that as early as the second week of January 2020. Yet publicly and to the World Health Organization and to President Trump when they met at the Davos World Economic Forum, Xi's line was, it's no big deal, we have it under control, it all is because of an animal market and we shut the market down, so don't worry about it. And then on the Trump side, this man clearly did not want to go through his election year trying to tackle a darn virus. It was denial mechanisms writ large. We all remember that press conference where he said there's only 15 cases, right, and those 15 will all be gone in no time. And
He was praising China as late as early March.
Yes, and when his Centers for Disease Control top scientists attempted to say publicly, sir, this is the nature of outbreaks. It always looks like just one, just two, just a handful when they start, but it's growing and we don't know the true numbers and we think it's serious. Then he shut the CDC up. And this is the other thing, to go back to a prior question of yours about, what's the soul searching going on in public health right now. You're already seeing a real game change with the Biden administration in terms of the role of the Centers for Disease Control. And the CDC, which had been the world's preeminent public health institution, planet Earth, bar none, nobody even close, has been muzzled and stifled and tromped into the ground by the Trump administration. And you see now that almost every day, the director of the CDC is part of the White House press briefings since Biden has come in. And we've seen a tidal wave of publications and scientific analyses coming forward just in the 2 weeks of the Biden administration. So we have some hope.
James got his second vaccine a week or so ago. I'm going to get mine in 4 days. What should we do? Should we change anything? We're not we still have to socially distance and mask, because I think that affects a lot of people out there, and there may be a false sense of immunity when that occurs.
Well, the answer to your question has a lot to do with your value system. If your reason for getting vaccinated and your only concern is your own safety and your own survival, well, maybe after an appropriate amount of time, letting the vaccine fully take after your second shot, you can go and be a jerk and wander around and pretend there's no epidemic. But if you have a higher value system, whether it's Judeo-Christian or wherever it comes from, and you actually care about other human beings, you think you have a responsibility to the people around you, whether they are family or strangers, then you must take to heart the fact that not one of these vaccines, not one, has been tested to see whether or not they actually stop the spread of virus. Our measure of success, when you hear that, say, the Moderna vaccine or the Pfizer vaccine are 95% effective, what that is a measure of is the relative possibility that you will get sick if you get infected. It doesn't say you can't carry virus and give it to another person. And I would say, as a cautionary tale, so that everybody understands how serious this point is, polio. Jonas Salk in the 1950s invented the first amazing vaccine of the second half of the 20th century, the polio vaccine. And those of us that got it way back when got injected in our arm with a vaccine. And what that vaccine did was absolutely 100% block us from getting the paralytic disease, the horrible paralysis of polio. But as it turns out, polioviruses live in your gut and hide out in cells in your intestinal tract. And it turned out that you could be vaccinated with the Salk vaccine and still have viruses hiding in your GI tract that you would pass. Because here's the point. Along comes Sabin, and Sabin says polio is an environmental disease. These kids have been vaccinated, but they can still carry virus and they pass it in their poop, and it goes out into the environment. So he invents the oral vaccine, which sterilizes virus out of the GI tract and truly stops you from being capable of spreading. So the lesson on this is, it is quite possible, and we don't know one way or the other, that people who have been fully vaccinated with any one of these vaccines, all doses, appropriate amount of time, immune system looks strong, and they are protected against getting the disease we call COVID, but they might not be protected against carrying the virus called SARS-CoV-2. And if that's the case, they have to keep wearing masks. They have to keep practicing social distancing. They have to keep taking care not to potentially be carriers. And let's keep in mind, the majority of all transmission right now in the United States of America is from people that have no symptoms.
This is like, this is the ultimate story maybe ever in mankind. And it's really, you have this is the way it seems to me, is you have this mutating ravenous virus, and it's like high noon against these like brilliant scientists that have like cornered in on it. And it's some kind of struggle that's just, it seems to me that it's just going to go on and on and on. It is for the foreseeable future. We're just going to be trying to stay one step ahead of this. Is there a flaw in my thinking?
Well, I think you're onto something there, because the real situation right now is that we have no strategy for tackling this virus. We have no global strategy. WHO doesn't have one. We have no national strategy. Even the nearly 200-page long COVID plan put out by the Biden administration is not a strategy. It's a list of tactics.
Right.
And, you know, those who know the difference between strategy and tactics know you don't have a strategy unless you have an agreed upon goal, a target. What are you trying to achieve? So you put 8 COVID scientists in the room and ask them, what do you think should be our target for the next, ultimate target? What are we trying to achieve? And you'll get no agreement. Some would say it must be eradicated, which would be like smallpox. It has to be completely eliminated from planet Earth. Some would say, we just have to buy enough time with vaccines that eventually we get something called herd immunity. And then, we add it to the pantheon of child vaccination schedules alongside measles to minimize it for the rest of whatever period of time. Some would say, it's like HIV, it'll be a permanent threat on the human landscape, a threat that didn't exist before the 1980s and did not afflict humanity. And we'll have to have an enormous movement of resources and wealth from rich countries to poor countries to control it in the years going forward. But we don't have a strategy, so that means that we can't really answer your question.
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to our last question. But the thing that always drove me crazy, and you are a very smart person, I'm not, but people say, you know what they need to do? They need to get some smart people in a room and listen to them. And mine is always the same thing. I know a lot of smart people, and you know what? They don't agree on shit. If you give me 5 smart people, I'm going to get 6 opinions. And I think just what you say is that we had all of these people in public health that have studied this, and we still can't seem to coalesce. And you're right. Look at what's happening in the city in Amazon in Brazil. Look what's happening, globally. This is not just a challenge for the United States. This thing is everywhere, and it's pretty clear. And I hope that smart people can come together and say, all right, this is what we got to do, and internationally. But I appreciate your take on it. But it is kind of depressing that we're this deep into it and still are catching knives, if you will.
All right.
I think that.
Go ahead.
I take your sober point, and I think as we go forward, the challenge is going to be to get us out of what President Biden has referred to rescue mode and into resilience reconstruction mode. And that would be an American phenomenon, but we can't really get out into reconstruction as long as the virus is still out there in the rest of the world. We are not on an island, and we are totally connected in every imaginable way to the rest of the planet, and need to be, or our economy collapses. So we will have to figure out a way that our arms of rescue embrace not just the 50 U.S. states and territories, but the whole planet.
Thank you.
Laurie Garrett, you've been a terrific guest. We've learned a lot. Some of it's a little, as James said, a little bit depressing, but it's a great warning for what we have to do ahead. And we thank you, and we hope you'll come back sometime.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, James, today we're welcoming a new sponsor to the show. Welcome IPVANISH. So what is IPVanish? You are probably asking. It's a virtual private network, a VPN for short. A VPN is a super important tool that helps you safely browse the internet. You can use VPN on your computers, tablets, phones, even things like your Fire Stick when you're streaming media. When you use an VPN, all your data is encrypted. We like that, James, don't you think?
We sure do. I'm going to tell you as soon as I can, I'm going to have Allie put me on this thing. But I like, because if you just go on the normal internet, and anything that you Google, if you want to, you Google knife sets, they get it, and all you do is you get 15 pop-up things of people trying to sell you knives. I mean, even if you're not watching porn, or but if you're just doing like really legit stuff, no, me never. Who would think I'd do such a thing? But you do that. The other thing is that if you travel a lot, like I hope that I'm able to do, when this pandemic slows down, is if I'm in Prague and I want to watch Meet the Press, I can go right on this network. If I want to watch the on this platform, I want to watch BBC. I mean, I like the idea of the whole thing. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to try this. This seems like one hell of a product that's really a good deal for curious people who like sometimes for their curiosities remain among themselves.
You're right. And IPVanish is just $349 a month. That's $349 a month or $27.99 a year. You can help protect your online privacy and security. With IPVanish, you get anonymous IP addresses so you can't be tracked by anyone on the web, which we all worry about a little bit now. You can circumvent any online censorship since IPVanish has more than 1,500 servers in more than 70 locations, and you get protection even when you're using your public Wi-Fi. Remember, with IPVanish, all your data is encrypted, so no one can snoop on what you're doing. James, you and I are going to be in this week, right?
I'm on this thing. As Trump might say, what do you got to lose? Not even $28.
Right. $349 a month or $27.99 a year. This is the time to sign up with our discount and their current promotional offerings. You can get a VPN for 65% off their usual offerings. You go to ipvanish.com/war room to claim your 65% savings. IPVanish is the best of the best, even rated 4.7 on a scale of 5. I wish I did that well in school on Trustpilot, and that's with more than 6,000 reviews. Show these guys some love. Remember, it's ipvanish.com/war room to get the deal and start protecting yourself online. Hey, James, this is our week for having the best. If you want to talk to the best analyst of the National Football League, and I'm relying on my son Benjamin, who says he'll forget more than I know about the NFL, he says far and away the best is Greg Cosell. He doesn't worry about the little stuff, it's the big stuff. He knows it inside out. He is at NFL Films for years. He worked with my dear friend Steve Sable. Greg, thanks for being with us. Steve was your close colleague, my longtime friend. He loved narratives. No one was better at crafting them. But there never, it seems to me, has been a narrative better than this. The greatest quarterback of all time versus the greatest young quarterback of all time. 43-year-old six-time Super Bowl winner against 25-year-old defending champ. With Steve not here, no one can better describe this than Greg Cosell. Tell us.
Well, before we do that, Al, I got to ask Carville, what the hell's going on with LSU football?
In terms of, look at how many players we got. 4 high-impact, 6 total on both teams, and 4 really high-impact players. Honey Badger, Clyde, Devin White, and Fournette. That LSU football is going to be well represented in this Super Bowl.
You didn't want to talk about the actual LSU team right now.
We got a strong recruiting class. We got Brad Johnson's kid is coming back. He really played quarterback well for us. Miles Brennan, before he went down, was like the 4th-ranked pass in the country. And traditionally, our problem has been, we got, until Joe Burrow, the greatest quarterback in college football history, comes along. But I feel pretty good about. I don't feel good about the last season, but I think we're play in a tough neighborhood, no doubt about that.
Well, one of my good friends is now your offensive coordinator, Jake Peets.
Yeah, I saw that hire. People kind of excited about it. You think we made a good hire there?
Yeah, no, I know Jake well, but
all right,
to respond to Al now
after the show, let's get to the Super Bowl. And I'm going to ask the end of the question, Greg.
Here's the narrative I would throw out there, Al. I would say that because the game is so quarterback driven, the NFL game as a whole, that we almost have the old school quarterback, the kind of quarterback that now people say will not really be the future of the league, the quarterback who works solely from the pocket and does not really have the ability to get outside of the pocket and make what we call second reaction plays, improvisational plays, versus the new breed quarterback, the quarterback who can, yes, throw it well from the pocket, but is so good at getting outside the pocket and making special plays. So it's really the old school quarterback that in some ways is being viewed as a dinosaur in the game versus the new breed quarterback that is now considered the way of the world when it comes to the quarterback position.
God, we all should be dinosaurs like Tom Brady, shouldn't we, Greg? What if you're Brady and Mahomes now and Reed and Aaron, what are you thinking is your greatest challenge on Sunday? What do you have to achieve, and what do you most worry about?
Well, that gets into a little bit, Al, the tactics of the game. I mean, you're dealing with Tom Brady facing a Steve Spagnuolo defense. He's the D coordinator for the Chiefs, and he is extremely aggressive. He blitzes an awful lot, and he blitzes against everybody. And my guess is he probably blitzes because he knows that, hey, if they give up one, so what? He knows his quarterback, Mahomes, is going to put up 35 anyway. So what's the difference if they give up one? But the challenge for Tom Brady and the Bucs offense is the blitz. How do they handle the blitz? Can they block it? Can they make plays against it? Because if they can't do that, it's going to be a tough afternoon. Because there have been games this year in which the Bucs offensive line has not been very good, and Brady's been under a lot of duress. And we know he's not moving anywhere. So if he's under duress, he's going to get hit and he's going to get sacked.
Well, and Mahomes also has to worry about his offensive line, doesn't he?
He sure does, because they lost their left tackle, Eric Fisher, to an Achilles tendon injury, and now they're playing a backup left tackle who's not even really a left tackle, in Mike Remmers. And for those who may remember, I guess this is a little history, but Mike Remmers was the right tackle for the Carolina Panthers when they lost in the Super Bowl to the Denver Broncos, and Von Miller was the MVP because Mike Remmers had a very, very difficult time trying to block Von Miller. So now Mike Remmers will be matched up against either Shaq Barrett or Jason Pierre-Paul, two very difficult matchups.
Well, at this, let me just, before I turn it over to James, let me just ask you about Brett. How does he do it? I mean, he's the seventh wonder of the world. Whether he wins or loses, his 10th Super Bowl, he's 43 years old, Greg. Now, to some of us that seems young, but not to football players. What is there a secret mental, psychological, physical for Tom Brady doing what no one else has ever done?
Well, I can only speak to what I see on film. We hear about his regimen with his nutrition and his working out. I'm sure that's a significant part of it. But very few quarterbacks, and I just finished my 41st season at NFL Film, so wow. I've seen a few plays here and there. I think that no quarterback has been as impressive with what I call repetitive mechanics. He does everything right on every snap physically. Now, are there plays on occasion where the defense prevents that? Of course. But he does the same thing all the time. And believe it or not every quarterback does. In fact, most quarterbacks don't. But Tom Brady is that guy. He does the same thing all the time. And that allows him to make great throws consistently. Everybody speaks about him as being clutch. The reality is he does the same thing in the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, and the fourth quarter. It's just the fourth quarter is closer to the end of the game, so people say he's clutch. But he does the same thing all the time.
Well, James.
So, Greg, if we're watching the game with you, early in the game, I gather one of the things you're going to be looking at is to see how the pass protection is going to really be a key as to how this ends. Is that kind of one of the primary things you're going to be?
Yeah, I think that's particularly a factor for the Bucs because Brady is not going to move. And we've seen Brady at times just throw the ball up. He threw an interception against Green Bay where there was a blitz that was not picked up, and he just threw it up, and it was intercepted by Jari Alexander. He's not going anywhere. So he needs a relatively clean pocket. Now, he's still very good and with little movements within the pocket, but he will not escape the pocket. So that's one thing I would absolutely look at. When it comes to Mahomes, he's a different kind of cat. I mean, he can get pressure and he can move around and make special plays. And in fact, he does that a lot, particularly on third down. This particular season, he had more rushes where he left the pocket on third down, converting them into first downs than any quarterback in the league. So with Mahomes, it's different.
Yeah, so it's a pretty good assumption that Mahomes and Brady are great, and they'll have a great game. But there'll be a story underneath. It'll be a big defensive play, or it could be that as a receiver that did exceptionally well. If a couple of players or maybe a unit you think might surprise us on the upside, with deference to the greatness of Mahomes and Brady. But is it going to be like the Kansas City tight end maybe, or is it going to be Devin White, or something like that? Who do you think has when the game is over, who's going to be the third interview?
Well, it's funny you say that, James, because I've been thinking a lot about that because, obviously I'm getting asked about a lot of things this given week. And I think when you look at the Chiefs, we all know about Mahomes. We know about Tyreek Hill. We know about Travis Kelce. I think a player to watch is McCall Hardman because he's another really explosive athlete. Great speed, great explosion. He's not a volume player. It's not as if they're going to throw it to him 10 times. But he was the one in that AFC Championship game that really got their offense going on that 50-yard run, basically a reverse type run. And he has that kind of explosive ability. So to me, he's a player separate from Mahomes, Hill, and Kelce to look at on the Chiefs that could be a big, big factor in this game.
So do you make predictions that's against the code of NFL films?
We always
I know Al wants me to do that,
James.
Yeah. That's the closing line. I didn't know we were quite ready for that.
We're not closing.
Well, I'll withdraw the question. Counselors, your turn.
I'm prepared because I knew Al was going to ask me. So I'm prepared to make a prediction. But I'm bad. Believe it or not, I'm bad at that because in my mind, there's always 5 variables on either side that could play out. But for Al's sake, I will be ready with a prediction when the time comes.
You're not as bad as Steve on that. But anyway, James, you have another question before I go, and then you go again.
Well, I'm going to come back to it. Just when I watched the AFC Championship game and I watched Kansas City, it just Mahomes. I've never seen. There's been a lot of great Lamar Jackson. Russell Wilson, people like that, but. And as I understand, the Saints really wanted him, and we drafted, and they were just
they did.
They were just nauseated when Kansas City picked him. Did other people know that this guy had this kind of talent? Was he a kind of sleeper in the draft?
Well, I can tell you, I spoke the year that he came out because I go to the scouting combine every year, and I know a lot of coaches and have great conversations. Because the scouting combine is like spring break for coaches because there's no game Sunday. So everybody's relaxed and you have great conversations. And here's what I heard a lot of. And I thought this too, watching his college tape. There was a concern. Everybody knew he was very, very talented. That was obvious. But the concern was he was such a loose and undisciplined player at Texas Tech. He ran around a lot. He didn't work within the structure of the offense. There was a concern among a lot of offensive coaches in the NFL that you spend, 16, 18 hours a day putting together your offense for the game on Sunday, and that he would not execute the game plan because he would play outside of the structure of it, that he would freelance far too much. And he does that at times, but Andy Reid has obviously done a really, really good job of getting him within the structure of his offense. But there was a definite concern, James. He was not viewed, if he was, he would have been the first pick in the draft. He was not viewed as an automatic great player. But you're right about the Saints. I know for a fact they picked number 11, and they ended up taking Marshawn Lattimore, as you probably remember. But the Chiefs jumped ahead of them with a trade to number 10, right, and they took Patrick Mahomes.
And I think they traded up for that 11 pick. And Lattimore was, he's not a rummy. He's a good pick, but Mahomes is what they really want. They really
But
wanted.
there was a concern about Mahomes. He was not viewed as an automatic, as a can't miss.
Right.
I mean, people knew his talent, which was obvious the way he could throw a football, but there were definite concerns about how he would perform within the structure of an NFL offense.
Greg, when you started at NFL Films 41 years ago, the line was, you can't be a great black quarterback. I mean, I'm sorry, that's not a position. Great wide receiver, defensive back, running back, some linemen. But there really were no great black quarterbacks back in 1979. Today, if you look at the young players, young quarterbacks other than Josh Allen, you worry whether you can be a great white quarterback.
That reminds me of a very quick story. So my first couple of years here at Films, obviously I was learning. It was a different company then. The world was different. And James will appreciate this part of it. But the first piece that I did outside of NFL Films, where they sent me on the road, I actually did a piece with Archie Manning, and I was in New Orleans. But the second interview I did was with Doug Williams, Al. And we became friends based on that. This goes back to maybe 1980. And obviously I mentioned that for obvious reasons based on your question. And he was a first-round pick of the Tampa Bay Bucks. And as you guys both know, Tampa, Florida, is in the South. And, this was was it 1978 or 79? I remember watching, believe it or not, Doug Williams in the Senior Bowl throwing touchdowns to Ozzie Newsome. So Doug either came out in 78 or 79. But he was the second interview I did for NFL Films back when I started. And, obviously he faced a ton of, if we're using a kind word, a ton of criticism.
Oh, man, did he? Ozzie Newsome played 14 years at Alabama, I promise you.
I remember watching that Senior Bowl. Doug Williams, I believe he threw.
That guy ever going to graduate?
Young quarterbacks are black today, right?
Yeah. And look, I don't know the reason for that. I think there's a sense now that the game is, as I said, you asked me about a narrative to start, and that's what I kind of spoke about, the fact that now you need to have movement ability. Back in those days, I remember, and Al, you may remember this, James, you may remember this. Do you remember Steve Bartkowski, the quarterback?
Sure.
Yeah.
He came out of Cal. He was actually Lee Steinberg's first client, if I'm not mistaken. And he came out of Cal, and he was 6'4", 225, drop back quarterback, big arm. That was the prototype. And that was the prototype for a long time. Right. Look, I remember when Carson Palmer came out of USC in 2003. That was the prototype.
Right.
Now the prototype's a little bit different.
Boy, it's changed. Greg, how has the National Football League, more than any other sports organization I can think of or league, been successful with this virus? They've had very few games postponed. They're making it all the way to the Super Bowl. That's in contrast to almost every other major sport. How have they done it?
Well, I hope people understand that I'm not being biased. I mean, obviously I work for the NFL, but I thought the league did an unbelievable job with the testing, with everything they've done. Look, I don't work for a team, so I'm not in the building of teams, but I work at NFL Films, and I can tell you for a fact, we're tested every week. We wear tracers. We come in the building. We have our temperature taken every day. I mean, even here at NFL Films, and all you can do is basically go to your office, keep the door shut, and just leave your office to go to the bathroom. So I'm sure the teams are even stricter in their protocols. And that's how they made it. When you get right down to it, there were only two main issues. It was the Titans early in the year and then the Ravens. Now, there was only one real game where you could say competitive balance was a real problem, and that was that Denver Broncos game where they didn't have a starting quarterback.
Yeah, they played the
Other
Saints.
than that, for the most part, it was, I hate to use the word normal, that's not the right word, but other than that, the season progressed. Because don't forget, it is a sport where players in a quote unquote normal season do get injured. So the league did an unbelievable job in getting to this point.
One quick one, and then before James wraps it up, before we get to your prediction, we got to be parochial. So tell us, Greg, who will be the quarterback next season for the New Orleans Saints and for the Washington football team?
Oh boy, I guess Drew has not made an announcement yet, has he?
He is not. They said they expect it within a week.
Expect that he'll retire, or just expect an announcement?
A decision. I think most,
Yeah.
most people think he will retire.
Boy, I got to tell you, I personally believe, and this is pure speculation. So I don't want to be held to this because that's what happens now. People might listen to this, and then on social media they'll tell me, well, that's what you said. I have no inside information, but if Drew retires, it would not surprise me if Taysom Hill's the quarterback for the Saints next year. It really wouldn't. I thought when he played, he showed some promise, and we know how good Sean Payton is in structuring offense, so that would not surprise me at all. The Washington football team is a little different animal. They're going to need to get a quarterback, and Al, I hate to say it, but I don't have an answer for that. They're going to have to go out and find one. Now, I don't know offhand where they draft, so I can't say whether they'll be in the running for one. But they will need to find a quarterback.
James.
Well, I'm so excited to have you on the show. I'm so excited about the game Sunday. But football is an evolving professional football, but all of football is an evolving sport. And, you're right. We had the sit in the pocket quarterback. We had different things. As the game goes forward, what do you think it's going to evolve from where it is today?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's always cyclical. I think that a lot of things that people think go away do come back. I think right now you've got quarterbacks that, as I said, make a lot of plays by getting outside the structure of the offense. I think defenses will respond to that. It's difficult to respond to for coaches because obviously when you structure your defense, you're structuring it for the structure of the offense. But I had a defensive coordinator who'd been in the league for years and years tell me this past summer that when you play a lot of these quarterbacks that can move, you really have two defenses. You have a defense for the first 2 seconds of the play, and then the defense for after 2 seconds of the play. But I think defensive coaches will start to think along those lines. I don't know exactly what that means. I'm not a coach, but I think that you'll start to see more of that. So it'll be cyclical in that regard. So I think that's one thing that you'll have to see because you're going to get more and more quarterbacks that can move around and make plays off schedule, off script.
Okay, Albert.
Well, all right. This is the time, Greg.
There's no drum roll out?
I interviewed Steve Sable 10 times before Super Bowls, and every time I asked him to make a prediction. Every one of those 10 times, and he got 2 right. So now we'll test you. We know what it is, and you're the best of the business. What's the scoreboard going to look like at 10 p.m. on Sunday night?
Boy,
I'm waiting for the drum roll, but
we'll have Jeremiah put one in. Okay, we got sound people. We can handle this. We got sound people. We like NFL films, man. All right, just hit the pregnant pause, and we'll have the drum roll.
Well, here's what I'm thinking, guys. When all's said and done, I think the Chiefs are going to win this game. I think that their offense is really difficult to defend. I'm not sure exactly what Todd Bowles, the D coordinator for the Bucs, will do in this game. He's been very blitz heavy, but also all 5 of their sacks against Aaron Rodgers in the AFC Championship game, none of them came against blitz. So I'm not sure how he's going to approach this, but I just think that the Chiefs are really difficult to defend with the way they can stretch the field vertically, expand it horizontally, Mahomes' ability to make those special plays. So what I'm going to do, Al, is I'm going to pick the Chiefs to win this game 34-24.
Wow. Steve, looking down into somewhere, eat your heart out because I think Greg Cosell is going to get it right this year. What do you think, James?
A genius is anybody that agrees with me. And I just, when I was watching that AFC Championship game, I said, I don't think anybody's going to beat this team. I really don't. And I saw them beat us, and they beat the Packers. I mean, they beat 2 real good football teams to get here. But I agree with Greg. I think this Kansas City team is just unbelievable. I mean, they guys got so many ways that they can beat you. And, Mahomes has just got, he's so much younger than Brady. And I think he just got so much more in his toolbox right now. So, but we'll see. That's one thing is you got to tee the pigskin up. All the cliches are.
That's why they play him.
Well,
That's why they play him. Any given Sunday.
It starts with a whistle, Greg, and it ends with a gun, right?
We'll see. I mean, I'm really looking forward to this one for so many reasons.
Yeah,
but,
me too.
Sometimes the Super Bowl, normally I'm there for obvious reasons. I am not in Tampa this year. So I'm at NFL Films and I'll be home watching the game. But normally I'm there. And this one would be a real exciting one to be at in a quote unquote normal world. But unfortunately, we're not in that kind of world right now.
Greg,
so I love the Glazers and they're very New Orleans oriented family. So
this is really, there's a lot of, I think, even living what we're living through, there's tremendous expectation and anticipation in this game.
Well, can I tell you a very quick story? I'll just take a minute.
Yes.
When Andy Reid got hired in Philadelphia, my wife and I went out with Andy Reid and his wife to dinner in Philadelphia. So I've known Andy for years. So, of course, Andy, I don't think anybody would call him svelte, and I don't think he would be bothered by the fact that no one would call him svelte. So we go out to dinner at one of the best steak places in Philadelphia. And, of course, we all get steak. And, it's soup to nuts kind of meal. So he orders a baked potato. And so the waiter says, how do you want that? And Andy, without skipping a beat, he happens to be a very funny man, by the way. And without skipping a beat, he just says, loaded. And, that to me is Andy Reid in a nutshell. He's a terrific guy. He's a terrific human being.
And one heck of a coach.
Yep.
Yeah.
We have had the best, James. Greg Cosell, there's no one like him. NFL Films, he is every bit as good as my son said he was, and I knew he was. Greg, thank you so much. We'll all be watching Sunday night.
We'll see.
Guys, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
See you again next year. Thanks, Greg.
All right, James, thanks.
You bet. Good luck.
Hey, when you don't have free time, you can't read or work or engage in personal development, let alone learning more about the things that interest you. You really are jammed. Let me tell you about the ultimate life hack for learning new things and getting ahead. It's an incredible app that solves the problem, and we highly recommend it. It's called BLINKIST, James. You're on board, right?
I'm totally on board. And if you stop and think of how to pronounce it, think of the Secretary of State when he needs to have some power-packed knowledge real quick.
Yeah, and James, with all the problems that Tony, who is a terrific appointment, by the way, is going to have around the world, maybe he'll need BLINKIST.
Right. So that's how we can think of BLINKIST. Again, what I really like about it is that you can learn a lot really fast. And so if you see something, I'm interested in that. You can do this, and they do a really good job of just condensing it down to essentially, are you going to write a PhD dissertation off of this? No, but that's not likely what you want. What you want in life is to learn as much about as many different things as you can, to have a real kind of sense of curiosity. And this is this app deal. This is for curious people who are in a hurry to learn as much as they can, as fast as they can, which I think describes most of the people that listen to this show. So this is one hell of a product. That I promise you.
No, you're right. BLINKIST, as opposed to Tony Blinken, is made for busy and successful people like you who want to get the main points of a book quickly so you can start using that information right away. And with this audio feature, BLINKIST makes it easy to finish a book anywhere, anytime. 12 million people are enjoying BLINKIST's massive and growing library right now. Everything from self-help to business, health, and history, along with the latest titles from bestsellers and the classic nonfiction titles you always meant to read but never had time.
Yes, that's right. When you think of Tony Blinken, think of BLINKIST. And maybe Tony Blinken can read BLINKIST when he needs to have some power-packed knowledge real quick.
Yeah, and James, with all the problems that Tony, who is a terrific appointment, by the way, is going to have around the world, maybe he'll need BLINKIST. They have great books on there. Two of the recent favorites are The Virgin Way, Everything I Know About Leadership by Richard Branson and Untrumping America by Dan Pfeiffer. So, James, let's do it.
All right. I like Richard Branson. Now he's going back to making $1 gazillion. He was supposedly going back. I can't follow the ups and downs of these guys, but that Virgin that's a good airline.
He's had some life. But you try Blinkist using our free voucher and share your personal experience with your listeners. With Blinkist, you get unlimited access to read or listen to a massive library of condensed nonfiction books, all the books you want, and all for one low price. Right now, for a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience, you all out there. Go to Blinkist.com/War Room. That's all one word to try it free for 7 days. Save 25% off your new subscription. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist, Blinkist.com/War Room to start your free day, 7-day trial, or look for the link in our show notes. And you'll also save 25% off, but only when you sign up at Blinkist.com/War Room, and we thank them for sponsoring this podcast. All right, James, the segment we love, questions from those really, really smart listeners out there. A number today are about politics. And let me tell you, listeners out there, I've been doing this for a long time because I'm really old. And the two smartest people, whatever we call them, consultants, operative strategists, I have ever known are James Carville and Stu Spencer. They may not know what kind of buy you want to make in Des Moines or who's the county chair down in Harris County, but they know politics, and there's no one better to ask right now than James Carville. So, James, let's start with Christian in Mississippi, who says, this is just a matter of personal curiosity from someone who's never been involved in politics. How do you approach concretely as a consultant? You're assigned a county you've never been to in Idaho or someplace and told to cut the Republican margins. What are some of the first things you do? What are the data points you collect? How do you collect them, and how do you formulate a strategy?
Right, and a lot of that depends on your resources. But what you generally try to do in politics is take all of the people that you know are going to vote against you no matter what, all right? Add that to all of the people that you know are going to vote for you no matter what. And then take those two numbers, add them together, and then subtract that from 100. So let's say Idaho's probably, but maybe the parts of Idaho, boys, that are pretty Democratic. So you say based on voting behavior, I think that 31% of these are going to vote against us no matter what. They're chronic voters. They turn out in high rates. They always vote Republicans. There's 24% in here that are chronic voters that Democratic. They all vote Democratic. All right. So you take those two numbers. You probably say, well, 31 and 24. All right. Then you say, all right, now who are the rest of these voters? What are the traits? Do they tend to be older? Do they tend to be less white? Do they go to church? Do they own guns? Do they have anything? And then once you figure that out, you say to yourself, or equally important, who are people that don't normally vote, that if we got them out, they would vote for our side? So that's basically when you start doing a campaign, it's the stuff you do in the third grade. It's, by this plus that equal that minus this is your target. And I think that found that little back of the envelope formula to be the rudimentary beginning of every campaign that you get into. And people always want to talk to the 24% that are already for you because you get good emotional feedback, you get good, the fun, you get a standing ovation, but it doesn't do you much good.
Christian, I hope you've written all that down because you're not going to get any better advice. James, I'm going to take two.
So so this is one of my great stories in politics. We had the Clinton reunion in, I don't know, the 20th reunion, I guess it was, at the start in Little Rock. And Connie Andrews, who worked with me, said that President Clinton was going through the line. And she said, Mr. President, this is my daughter. She wants to be president one day. What advice do you have for her? And he kind of put his head back in a way, he kind of shook his finger, and he said two things: study hard and meet as many people as you can that are not like you. I think that's the best advice for a young person that wants to get into politics, is study hard and try to associate and learn about as many different people as you can that are not from the same cut a cloth that you are. I think that's
James, that's a great advice for politics. It's a great advice for other things too. It's one of my constant refrains up at the University of Pennsylvania. Spend time with people who are different than you. Football players spend time with poets. It doesn't happen enough, but that is great advice. The next, question, I'm going to combine two we have here because Hunter in Clovis, California, asked if the Democrats have any prospects for getting rid of the filibuster. And Nick from down in Melbourne, Australia, wants to know what strategies can Democrats adopt to pass the John Lewis voting rights, given the likely filibuster by Republicans and the awful stuff that already Republicans are trying to do in states to curb voting. Our friend Fred Wertheimer has, I think, an interesting idea here. I'm not sure it'll fly because you're not going to get that kind of campaign reform stuff through the Senate with Mitch McConnell there. The only thing that Mitch McConnell cares more about than judges is his power and his money, and this would threaten that. He will do whatever it takes to stop it. So you got to break the filibuster. And what Fred and others are talking about is there ought to be some kind of modification so that on a small number of bills, and this would be the perfect vehicle. This is about citizens' rights. This is about their right to vote. This is about getting rid of some of the sleaze in the business. I don't know if they can do it, but that's the way to do it.
I agree. I defer to Fred and you on this because you've been much more schooled in the ways of Hill. Just don't say you're repealing the filibuster. You're just modifying it on this one kind of national emergency thing. And, eventually, depending on what happens, they'll probably chip away at it. But, yeah, I think that's if it comes about, it'll come about, I suspect, in some way like that.
Right.
But
James, Dave in Seattle, this is going to you again, the eminence Greece, as they say. He says, I'm wondering, where do I contribute dollars now? The 2020 election is over. I'm still getting multiple frantic calls. Look what Mitch did now. You know those emails that go out and text. I want to live my life, but I want to keep donating because I really care about what's happening in the country. Do I donate to the DNC, the Senate committee, the House committee? I can't do them all. So how do I decide? What do you recommend?
I would go directly to the Senate campaigns. And I would, of course, pay particular attention, as I think you would agree, to North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. You got a tough hole in Georgia. I mean, really tough hole in Georgia. You got a pretty tough hole in Arizona. So pick out the Senate seats that you think that the Democrats have a good chance. And I would, unless you're going to write, huge $100,000 checks, or you're in some danger of busting a limit, which I'm assuming you're not, I would always advise people to have more leeway. There's certain amounts of money that's restricted and they can't get the best rate or anything. Pound for pound, dollar for dollar, I recommend a direct contribution to the campaign.
Okay, good advice. Here's one from Gordy in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. That's one of my very favorite towns. I love Gettysburg. Who asked, why is infrastructure so hard? Joe Biden can win over Trump voters if he put a few thousand of them at work fixing bridges and roads and building airports and schools, all while making a good wage, and it would be a tremendous boost to the economy. And I'll tell you why it is so hard, and it's 90% this time the Republicans' fault. They insist on two things. One, some of them say, well, you got to pay for it. This is not an entitlement program. This is an investment. It's going to pay for itself 3, 4, or 5 times over again. When you have decaying bridges and decaying roads, it hurts the economy. I mean, look at our airports compared to China. And then they go and they want to impose various restrictions that would really cripple labor unions in some of these places. What you ought to do is come up with a simple, clean infrastructure bill, big sorts of things, frankly, that Trump talked about, and do it because the country needs it.
So there's a great David Leon Hart and another journalist who has a difficult name to pronounce. I can't remember it, so I'm not going to try to pronounce it.
Right.
I mean, no disrespect. All right? And it's about how stunningly better the economy is over the last 75, 80 years or more under Democrats and Republicans. The chances that this is just random are almost nil. Now, one of the things that is that, and they said, well, Republicans, they like deficit spending when they're in office, but they don't like deficit spending when the Democrats in office. And they discover their principles. No, the truth of the matter is Keynesian multipliers work. Right? They just do. I'm not an economist. I can't do the math on a Keynesian multiplier, but time and time again, we know it works. The reason that it's so hard is they know if Joe Biden gets a big infrastructure plan in, of which you basically, the interest rates are negative, so you're not even paying interest on paying it back. It will put people at work. It'll make the country a better place. Democrats will win re-election. That's why they're against it. They're not against it on principle. They're against it because they actually know that it works. And they have always used it when they get in office because, it works limitless when you have a limit on it because their strategy is if you give all the money to the rich people, somehow or other, it'll trickle down to middle-class people. But it works a little bit. But what they know is if they institute real sound, big D democratic economic policy, talking about infrastructure, talking about major investments in public needs, that it's going to work and they're going to lose an election. That's the reason that they're against it. This principle don't have shit to do with it. They know this works. Everyone knows it works.
Probably the thing that we should do and won't do is increase the gas tax. And there's a way to rebate that to those who get hurt by it, by farmers. But that's not going to happen. But you're right. Here's one from Joseph in Houston, Texas. And I don't know if he's running, but he asked you, James, is Beto O'Rourke have any chance to beat Greg Abbott? I supported him for senator. Didn't think he was ready for president. Does he have what it takes for governor? And do you think he'll run?
Yeah, I don't know. I was reading this thing, just broke my heart about this cardiologist in Laredo. The South Texas border, which was a very difficult time for Democrats in 2020, is under just this god-awful pandemic. And Abbott won't do anything because he's so paralyzed by the crazy right-wingers in Texas. I know that Texas was disappointing to us in 2020. We had Richard Murray on. We had high hopes for Texas. They turned to be scorned. Abbott is he's caught. There's no decisive leadership. He's caught between two things. The virus is horrible last, particularly horrible in the Valley. And, Beto did a remarkable thing in 2018. He seemed to have gotten ahead of himself in 2020. The thing that he's going to have to do is convince people, which he has a lot of energy, he has a lot of communication skills, or something different about him. Does he have the kind of discipline to be the governor of Texas? If he can mount that hurdle, he might have a good chance. I mean, why not? Got to try something.
Yeah, he was a disappointment as a presidential candidate, that's for sure. Maybe he can, rekindle that.
Kamala Harris was a disappointment too, but see, look where she went.
Yeah. Rebecca from Ann Arbor. It's another one of my favorite cities. I love it when people write from our favorite cities. I love Ann Arbor, Michigan.
What's that deli there? Zingerman's or something? Jesus, man, that place is unbelievable.
Rebecca asked, can the Senate subpoena QAnon to testify at the impeachment trial? Rebecca, they can, Chuck Schumer and the majority can subpoena anyone they want to. I think they will probably keep it at a minimum because they don't want a long trial. And they're going to count on, as James said earlier, the very effective House presentation and some videos. Mike, I don't know if there'll be any witnesses, but if so, there'll be very few.
Yeah, I have no reason. I have every reason to agree with you. I think it's it's a real problem because they got a question of duration and evidence, and some hard choices they're going to have to make here. We'll see, but I think there's going to be a lot of video evidence that's going to come up. It's going to be highly interesting. Highly interesting. James,
we'll wrap up with something that's a first cousin of that. This is from Andrew in San Diego, California, who says, Benghazi to January 6 parallels abound. This is your false equivalency. Namely, armed insurgents conducting deadly attacks on U.S. government facilities. That is, I think Andrew would agree with me, that is total bullshit. But if you watch Fox News and other, that's the narrative that they are pushing. And how well are the Democrats doing in delineating this ain't Benghazi, which was a nothing to begin with?
Yeah, this was a mob attacking our own capital as opposed to a mob attacking a satellite embassy or whatever it was. I mean, for God's sakes. But I think that's why I'm still going on the over on the 58.5. I'm counting on, something really powerful here. And I think the equivalency here is, I agree totally with you. It's not remotely. By the way, talk about places that I love. It's San Diego, and oh my God, that's a great. Has a lot there. All of San Diego County is a great place.
Oh, it's
so
beautiful down there.
Yeah.
And we didn't mention Melbourne, which is.
Yeah, I've never been. I went to Sydney, and I want to go to Melbourne. The Australians will tell you that Melbourne is a much more Australian city than Sydney is. So I definitely want to go.
Okay, keep those cards and letters coming because they really are good. And the hardest thing to do is to figure out which 7 or 8 we can use because there are so many good questions that come in, and some of them we'll get to next week. So we appreciate it, and please tell us where you're from. Hey, James, my outrage is this. The damage done by the Trump sycophants who spread the lie of a possible stolen election is deeply dangerous and, I fear, durable. Pretending an election decided by 7 million popular votes and 306 electoral votes, that's fraudulent, is an invitation for doing the same, particularly in genuinely close elections like we had in 2016, 2012, 2004, 2000, 1992, 1976, 1968, 1960. It's awful what they have done. And we know the chief perpetrators were Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and all those Republican members of Congress, including Kevin McCarthy, who hours after the Capitol carnage voted not to accept the legitimate Biden victory. But that's not my outrage. My outrage is those who were enablers, who are not targeted as much for what they did, like Mitch McConnell. Read the New York Times piece last weekend on those dark 77 days. He played games. I've seen references to the 2 Missouri Republicans suggesting Roy Blunt is a good, responsible senator versus Hawley, pretty low bar. For 4 weeks after the election, the outcome of which was crystal clear within days, Roy Blunt was saying the outcome is still uncertain and it was too early to call Biden the president-elect. 4 years earlier, that's what he called Trump, who won a much closer election the day afterwards. These guys put petty, partisan, dishonest claims ahead of the country. McConnell's and the Blunts should be held accountable too. And James, I just note one thing that came out today. Lynn Wood, the guy who Ken Starr praised, the Georgia attorney who made all the charges down there about fraudulent voting, it appears he's being investigated because he may have voted illegally in Georgia.
Well, I will stay with the New York Times under the Bobby Kennedy assertion that those whom much is given, much is expected. And I understand it's a great newspaper and they have this. I think the editorial policy and a lot of the op-ed stuff is like full of shit. And the height of full of shitness was this past week when they ran an editorial saying Biden needs to get these things done legislatively and not via executive order. Oh, really? Of course, this is just going to happen. I hesitate to point out that on January the 1st, 1863, a very famous executive order took place. It's called the Emancipation Proclamation. But those people have their heads stuck so far up their butts they can't see what they're doing. It's not to say that it's not that Maggie Haberman or Jamar Marine or any of these people or the people that cover, the pandemic for them are not doing brilliant work. But they got to do something about the people who run that opinion section of that newspaper because they're just utterly goofy.
James, having worked in this business for a long time and having written for both, don't worry about it. Pay attention to the news pages. If you have free time, read the editorials or read the columns.
I'll get off of this.
It's the news pages that really count. So focus on that, and when they foul up, as they sometimes do on that, that'll upset you a lot more than a silly editorial or a dumb column.
But wouldn't it be nice if people, educated people there, could write something meaningful and intelligent that would contribute to something, as opposed to that's all I'm saying. You're right. It's not. I'm not. Going off in a tangent, but it's really this guy, Mr. Applebaum, who started with making fun of LSU, saying it's not a real school, and why are they giving a holiday after that? And people like that, and the arrogance that seeps through there just irritates the hell out of people. But this is my last time. I'm leaving them alone. They can go write all the goofy crap they want about.
No, but you're right. Maggie Haberman, John Martin, Peter Baker.
They're great reporters. They deserve a better opinion page than they get.
Right. I don't pay much attention to it. Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. Don't forget to send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. We love the questions. Remember to include where you're from. Also remember to check out the links to our sponsors in the show notes. We deeply thank you for supporting them. It's what makes this podcast happen. To keep up with us every week, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our war room planning. Next week, the impeachment trial will be underway.